Hi, hello, welcome. This is Let's Talk About Myths, baby, and I am your host, Liv, here with more of my answers to your questions. And I'm recording this on Thursday, so just 2 days after I released the first part of this Q&A, and I've already had lots of you on Spotify commenting that you would like more of these. So I think we'll start with a quarterly Q&A period. Honestly, if everyone loves them, that's great for me because it is a little bit easier than writing a 5,000-word script. So thank you. And also, I love this. I love that I get to get all these new ideas from you all, and sort of it opens up my mind to all these new possibilities when I have someone else's phrasing of a question, or it's just, honestly, it's really fun. So I'll figure out exactly, what's going to happen there, but we will be doing more of these. And I still have loads of your questions to get through, as many as possible. So let's just jump right back in. The best answers are ridiculously long-winded and incredibly detailed in historical context answers. Continuing the Q&A. All right, I have one here from M, and she says, if you had to choose and rank your top 3 favorite mythological women, who would they be and why? Congrats on 7 years of the pod. Thank you, M. Okay. Oh, this is always so hard. It so depends on my mood and so many different factors. But at the risk of feeling awful when I forget someone or remember why I love someone else, I'm going to say, we're going from the top apparently because it's just what's coming to my mind. Obviously, number 1 is Medusa. Number 2, Aphrodite. Historically speaking, I just fucking love her. And you know what? Number 3, we're going to go Thetis, because lately I've just been hearing so many damn interesting things about Thetis, and I am perpetually wanting to learn more. All right, this next one is from Connor, who says, as an avid Dungeons & Dragons player, I was curious if you were aware that the official monster manual has creatures to fight such as centaurs, chimeras, cyclops, harpies, hydras, minotaur, and satyrs. I'm also specifically curious about your thoughts on the fact that they include Pegasus. Indeed, it calls them calls the winged horses known as Pegasi. Most importantly, they include Medusa, but as monsters which are, quote, deadly as they are ravaging and suffering an immortal curse brought on by their vanity. So he goes on to say the manual described Medusas as individuals who, quote, pay the price for their vanity and hubris by striking bargains with the gods and then becoming cursed monsters. Obviously, the end of this is just given your research into Medusa. I was curious about your take on this. And, Connor, my take on that is I hate it. I hate it, and I'm not surprised. I don't want to say that that's wrong. Also, I've always wanted to play D&D. I just haven't had the opportunity. It seems so fun. But, that stuff just, it's like a long-standing issue, this idea that Medusa was hubristic in some way, that she was punished. I mean, obviously there's the Ovid version, where she's punished, but it's certainly not for hubris there. But then there's this tiny little single sentence in Pseudo-Apollodorus that suggests that maybe she compared herself in beauty to Athena, which I don't buy for a second. And it's literally an afterthought in an incredibly late source. So, factually, obviously that's not a thing, but it's definitely an incredibly common depiction of her. This idea that I even actually read before I read this an hour ago, I read a pitch or something where Medusa was described as at least one of the words was alluring, destructive and alluring. And I just she's never alluring in any kind of explicit way. She isn't. But the men love to make it seem like she was calling to them in some way. The woman just couldn't be killed. And remember, in the Greek sources, there's no evidence that she ever harmed anyone before Perseus killed her and took her head, and he killed her while she was sleeping. Like, there is no heroic journey in terms of, like, getting Medusa's head. It's then her head serves as this protective device that then goes on the journeys. But, like, anyway, long story short, I don't like it, Connor, but I like the rest. The problem is, if I played, I would just be that person with every Greek mythological reference. It's probably best I don't. This next one comes from Amy, who says, who in mythology do you think needs the most therapy? And who would be the best therapist? I love this question. I didn't read that before this moment, and I love it. Thank you, Amy. Apollo needs the most therapy. Hestia would be the best therapist. I do think probably Apollo is tied with Athena for needing the most therapy. Like, they both have daddy and mommy issues. And they're just both kind of, like, just a little damaged, you know? And I do, to be clear, I say this as somebody who loves going to therapy and does it regularly. So it's no judgment. It's purely the behavior of their characters. All right, this next one is from Jovi, who says, what is your favorite Greek mythology-inspired book? You know, books are so hard. Like, I get asked about books all the time, and it's so tough because, like, I mean, I have to read so many different things, but mostly I do read the ancient sources now, you know, so I don't think that really, like, counts in on that. And, like, I mean, I think probably from a publicity standpoint, I should say my own. I'm the author of Greek mythology, the gods, goddesses, and heroes handbook. So, you know, that one's number one. After that one, if I'm completely honest, I haven't really read many others that are, like, you know, modern authors writing about Greek myths, like, in the same way that I did. Purely because, like, I want to do it better one day, and, like, also I just get weird. I don't know. I'm weird now. Everything's been ruined for me, but, like, in a good way. I'm rambling. It's okay. Really, I just love reading the ancient sources. Like, I guess you probably wanted it as, like, a suggestion, so I'll just suggest my own book. Greek Mythology, the Gods, Goddesses, and Heroes Handbook. It is available everywhere books are sold, and also in Korean and Turkish, if you can believe it. That's fun. But, you know, Edith Hamilton's is also classic and easy to find in used bookstores if you want to find something a little less expensive, and also, you know, it's very detailed and it's, like, pretty great. There's a new one by, oh gosh, honestly, there's so many lately, and I haven't had a chance to read them, so I can't recommend more than mine. But, you know, that's what probably a publicist would tell me to do anyway. All right, this next one is from Terry, and she says, I've just discovered your podcast, and I'm currently listening to Heracles 0 to Hero, just like that. I'm finding it really fun to listen to, and you make it so easy to understand. How does it make you feel that people are still discovering the podcast, and how do you feel about how far it's come? Thanks. Oh, I love that. Thank you, Terry. I mean, I talk about this, like, in different ways sometimes, like, fairly often, because I like to joke about how much I don't like my first episodes of the podcast. But I think it's just coming from a place of pride in how I do it now. Like, in the past 7 years, I have learned so much. I think I've become really good at what I do, and I really love what I do. So I'm just, like, obsessed with how much better I think I've gotten, and, like, how, and I know everyone loves the earlier stuff, and I love that. And, you know, better is subjective. The earlier ones are shorter, they're less detailed. Like, that certainly appeals to people as well, and that's great. But I fucking love going into, like, the most minute, nerdiest detail. And, like, I love just how much my brain has transformed. The way I'll now, like, look at a word and be like, ooh, like, etymologically speaking, I think this has ties to, like, this, and that. Like, it's incredibly fun. And so, you know, I mean, I hear from people so often who are discovering the show and starting from the beginning, like, so often. And it always makes me so happy. There's someone, I'm sorry, I'm going to forget your handle, but, like, in case you were wondering, I have noticed, there's somebody who's been listening to the back catalog and, like, commenting on Instagram posts and, like, letting me know. And it's really sweet. And I love that. Like, I love hearing that, like, you're all still listening to stuff I did 7 years ago, and that hopefully, you know, you're going to keep going and see how far I've come now. It's just, yeah, I mean, I fucking love it. And, like, the changes I'm making this year, like, it's 7 years in, but we're, you know, I think still going so strong, and I've got a bunch of new stuff coming and, like, new ideas. Michaela and I are really streamlining everything. Like, I'm really optimistic about this show and my job. And also, like, it's been a while since I felt that way. So, like, it's pretty great. So the answer, Terry, is it's fucking awesome. Thanks for listening. This next one's from Lily, who says, love the show and your passion for this shit. You mentioned recently how Ovid used gendered nouns to emphasize transformation myths. Do you know of any myth-related examples that use this in ancient Greek? And, they said they're in their first year learning it, and it's so interesting. Then you probably are gonna know more than me. So I don't know ancient Greek, unfortunately. Like, I know a lot of ancient Greek words, and I can figure out stuff, because I know enough, to search for things, but, like, I don't know it. If a guest comes on and tells me that, I'm gonna be utterly thrilled. I don't know how, like, I know, Latin, uses really different, like, Latin's a very different language, and, there's going to be so many differences where I don't know if Greek nouns are gendered in the same way. I imagine they probably are, but Greek is a really interesting language, as you'll continue to learn, so that's my rambling way of saying, no, I have no idea, and I'm sorry, I'd love if I knew. All right, this next one is from, it's French, and so I should be able to pronounce, we're gonna guess, Gil? If you can believe it, I am French. It's just that I am such colonizer French that it's been too long and I don't speak it. Anyway, they ask, it's been amazing following your podcast for these 7 years, or rather they say this. I've loved seeing how your research process has deepened and gotten more complex over time. What have you felt is the biggest barrier to academic level research for someone like you? I mean, mostly it's just that everything's behind paywalls. Everything's behind paywalls, and I don't have institution access to anything. Michaela does, so if we know that something exists, she can usually get it because she's doing a program at UBC. But, like, without the knowing where to look and stuff, and, like, oh my god, papers can just be really dry if I don't know what I'm going to get out of it. So, unfortunately, like, it just means I don't tend to look too much for academic level sources. It's that's what I love having my guests for, is they share all that stuff with me, and so I work primarily with the ancient sources. When it comes to special topics, I'll say, like, I've often found books and things for that. Like, if I'm doing enough episodes on it, then I can justify buying books. And so I have, like, a shit ton on Ovid and Euripides and, tragedy and playwrights in general and, like, specific topics. I have a lot of academic books. But it's really only if I, like, have enough content that I can get from that stuff to justify. Because usually they're, like, $50 to $100. One of my favorite sources to use is this, like, academic level text by Timothy Gantz. I talk about it all the time. It's called The Early Greek Myths. And essentially it's just this, like, he just essentially compiled, like, everything from the surviving sources and a lot of pottery and stuff on every character. So, like, the index is on Unreal, and it's like a 2-volume set. It was like 150 Canadian dollars for both. And so it's like I have to be able to use it a lot. And also, thankfully, like, this show makes me enough that I can do that, but it's just shitty. Like, I wish I had access to institutional level stuff. That's the answer. So the biggest barrier is just, like, access, but also, like, knowing what to look for, right? Because so much academic stuff is, like, kind of published into a vacuum, and that sucks because it's fucking interesting. But because it doesn't, it is not priced for the public, it is not marketed to the public, like, it's just sort of, I just have no idea. So every once in a while I'll search JSTOR, but there's, like, a bazillion articles. It's too much to search through. And, when I'm doing this as often as I am, scripted once a week, like, I don't have the time to go searching through lists and lists and lists of papers. And that's why I sort of stick to my standard ancient sources as much as possible. It's a good question, though, because, yes, as you say, like, I'm very proud of how much the research process has deepened. And certainly it has. My knowledge of the ancient sources now is, I'm very proud of the level of knowledge that exists. And so, like, yeah, it's still very true, but in terms of like individual researchers, unless they've written a book that's specific to a topic I'm going to do a whole series on, like I tend not to be able to find it both in terms of access and also time. Yeah. It's just, I mean, it's tough when you're writing 5,000 words a week. It means research has to be quick. Next one is from Andy, and they say, "Hi, Liv, love your show. It has inspired me so much. My question is, what do you think is missing from movie and TV adaptations of mythological stories that has them be so much less successful than other media? It's so interesting to me to see everyone in bookish circles talk so much about Greek myth retellings and seeing that games like Hades and Stray Gods and musicals like Hadestown and Epic get all the success, yet I had literally never heard of Troy Fall of a City until there was a mention in your show by a guest. Thank you for doing this show. Thank you for being a female neurodivergent voice in this field. Thank you for showing that you don't have to have an extensive academic background to love and research myth and history. You're an inspiration. Thank you. I normally haven't been reading that kind of stuff because it makes me react like that. But I just kept going in that one, and it was really nice. Thank you. And by that, I mean read aloud. Like, I do read it. I just mean I have trouble reading too much praise of myself into the microphone. Andy, oh my God, I wish I had the answers. But you know what? I do have the answers. It's just that, the right people aren't asking me for them. So, like, in my opinion, and I won't say I speak to Troy Fall of a City because I haven't seen it. The first episode was just, I couldn't get past how British everything was. And I just had to stop there. But I think, like in terms of movies, let's say like the big Hollywood blockbuster movies that they've attempted when it comes to Greek mythology and ancient Greece, like, I mean, the historical ones often do better. And I think that's because we have a better grasp on history, certainly. But I also think we technically do have a better grasp on mythology. It's just that like the things that they've chosen to adapt in movies have tended to be like complete inventions, or like they take a myth and they fuck with it so much that it doesn't resemble that myth by the end movie. And that's why I jokingly / seriously say that Disney's Hercules is one of the most mythologically accurate adaptations. And I say that because it features the most things that Heracles actually did. The bar is low. But for the most part, the like moments they show, like it's mostly in like montage scenes and stuff, but like that's real. And like, saving a woman from a centaur is real. It wasn't Meg, sure, but like there's like a lot in there that's actually true to the sources. Whereas then you get to like Clash of the Titans and they're like, what if there were giant scorpions? And like that's in the new one, and the old one it's like, okay, what if there were like fighting skeletons? And it looks incredibly cool, but it's like not mythological. And then the introduction of Pegasus, and like they just skew the stories so much that they don't resemble the myths. They resemble something from Hollywood, and Hollywood doesn't know what myths are. Like Hollywood does not understand mythology, and so when they take these properties where they're like people like these characters, they remove them so much from the cultural mythology that exists within them that they don't resemble it and just end up being fucking garbage. Like that movie Immortals, I will never stop thinking about how much that movie does not resemble a single Greek myth. Like the kid is named Theseus, and then like I think Acrisius is in it. Which, is Acrisius in that one? Now I'm just gonna ramble, and he should be in the Perseus one, so maybe I'm wrong. Either way, the Immortals does not resemble anything Greek myth, save like the name Theseus and maybe a handful of others. And they're like, here, it's Greek mythology. And, Troy decided to just like up the misogyny and get rid of all of the divinity, which is like the crux of the Iliad. Like the Iliad is about the rage of Achilles and all the violence and like the machinations of the gods. And in Troy, it's like, well, Achilles is like, I mean, he's mad, but he's not mad like the fucking son of a goddess mad. He's not like call his goddess mom from the sea mad. He's not, his mom goes and begs at the knees of Zeus to help her son mad. Like those are the things that would make an Iliad adaptation, amazing. Is the divinity, and, having seen a tiny bit of Fall of a City, like, I will say, I think mythologically they got a lot more right. It's just that it's hindered by being so British that I don't even know what to do with it. But, like, at least they did something more accurate. I think one of the most accurate, but also, like, not, but at least they have characters doing things from myth, the bars in the ground, is actually, there's this show called BBC's Atlantis, and hear me out, it is about Atlantis, kind of. But really, it's just, like, they wanted to call it Atlantis, but all they really wanted to do is, like, just cover as many myths as possible, and I think they succeeded pretty well. I think I watched the whole first season. There's only 2. It's pretty old, but it's cute. I watched it for a podcast called Movies We Dig. If you feel like going and listening to that, it was really fun, and we talked about what's in the show. Like, so yeah, I mean, to answer this question concisely, I'm really good at that. Like, honestly, it's just that they don't actually, like, engage with mythology for what it is. They engage with it like the heroes are Marvel characters and not cultural creations over like 2,000 years. And I think that if they meaningfully engaged with that idea and all of the things that go into making a myth culturally relevant and important and interesting, then, like, it actually would be really good. And I mean, I would take it as, like, I would lower the bar as much as saying that I think that if they, like, picked a certain myth, say Perseus even, and actually stuck to what is in the surviving sources, it would be really interesting. But instead, they make it weird, and they always have to have, like, humans fighting gods, which, like, never happens. And, they just always have to make it a big old thing, maybe toss in a kraken for good measure. It's hot nonsense. Also, it's just occurred to me that at some point earlier, I did refer to the old Clash of the Titans having skeletons. I know that that's not right. That's Jason and the Argonauts. Regardless, that's another Greek mythology movie that is incredibly fun. And actually, you know what? That one also, maybe that incredibly old Jason and the Argonauts is also one of the most mythologically accurate, which is saying something because it has skeletons that fight people. All right, this next one is from Claire, but I'm putting a pin in it. Claire asked, what did you do on your Myths Baby Grease tour? What was your favorite part? Just generally talk about it and make us all jealous. Would love to go with you one day. Thank you, Claire. I'm really excited to be doing these again. Michaela and I are going to record something very soon. Actually, we should have done it already. We're going to record something together where we chat about the tour, how it went, what we did. It's easier and it'll be nicer to have that conversation between us. But we're going to share all that we can about that and hopefully have it tie to the announcement for next year's. I've mentioned it before, but I am working on having 2 tours, 2 different kind of options for people who, want to spend less, but also might want to do less things, or the people who can afford to go on this longer trip that sort of it's just going to go further and all of that. So more on that soon. Thank you for asking. All right, this next one is from Constance. It's an easy answer. The question is, who is the most misunderstood mythology character? The answer is Medusa. It's simple. It's to the point. Most modern notions of Medusa have absolutely no connection with the ancient sources. Oh, I don't know. I'll never stop talking about it. So I'm sure I'll talk about this more in the future. Specifically when I have more information about when my little contribution to the book is coming out, because, do I have thoughts on Medusa? Thank you for asking. All right. This next one is from Sky, and they say, I know you've said to not think too hard about chronology. Oh, I'm excited already, Sky. But something I can't seem to get past is Hephaestus being the one to crack open Zeus's head, because isn't Athena being born the reason Hera made Hephaestus in the first place? Since there are multiple variations of the myths, do you know if Hera creating Hephaestus couldn't have different reasons / origins? Hopefully this makes sense. Oh no, you made sense. The myths don't make sense. Don't worry. It's not you. Okay, so my incredibly, incredibly educated theory on what's happening here is honestly probably disappointingly simple. I think we're working with just multiple traditions, and it's not so much that like, so, you asked that clarifying question of like, is there a reason why Hera would create Hephaestus, without the context of Zeus, quote unquote, giving birth to Athena by himself. And so, I guess, I don't know if we all need a recap, but essentially that's it, is that Hera creates Hephaestus because she's pissed off that Zeus has been saying that he created Athena. Of course, the context is that he did not create Athena. He ate Athena's mother. And then she was born from his head. It's a whole thing. We can't get into it today. But, there's so much going on in that. Oh, maybe I need to do an episode on that. Thank you, Sky. Maybe you'll hear more about this in the future. But to answer your question, I think what's just happening here is this: we're working with multiple traditions. And so, I'll say it for the trillionth time. I'm sorry, everyone, but it's so relevant and it just remains true. And I'm so glad I get to repeat this because I really I think it's the most interesting thing in the world. And the answer is just, when you're looking at sources that are coming from 1,000+ year period, it isn't about, answering all of the questions or having all the answers or even having like a full and detailed explanation for something. It's just not always about that. And so what I think is probably happening is that, like one group of ancient Greeks had the story about Athena being born of Zeus's head and Hera being jealous. And another group of Greeks has the, Athena was born from Zeus's head and Hephaestus is the god of the forge. He's the one who uses hammers. So he would be the one to break open Zeus's skull. Right? So what we're existing in is like a world where both things are true. And over the course of 100 or 1,000 years, and that's like maybe a bit of an exaggeration, but we're talking like at least 700. And so over the course of that time, eventually the stories get merged together. And it's really all just coming down to the fact that like the ancient Greek world was very separate. They shared generally a language, but it had vastly different dialects across the Greek world. They shared vaguely a culture, but it had vastly different, what might as well be dialects, like across the ancient world. And so, there just wasn't ever like one cohesive narrative of anything. It's just that a handful survive for us. And so often we think there should be a cohesive narrative or that there is because enough things are similar. But there never was, right? Like we're talking so many thousands of years of not only all of these vastly different places and dialects and stories and all of that, but also like, the hundreds and hundreds of years when these stories are being told before anyone could write them down or before anyone wanted to write them down. Because also writing them down, was just not a tradition back then. They were told orally, like it just wasn't about putting them, into the record. And so what we're just looking at is like more of those examples of like why, there's stories from Heracles across the whole Greek world because people wanted to insert themselves into this cultural icon. And so, what it really is just we're working with all of these different traditions eventually coming together. Because you also have to think about that, like, in terms of the storyline, those two gods often line up. But in terms of the like historical cultural record, they might not have been both popular in the same early ancient Greek places. They wouldn't necessarily have had the same characters right from the start. And so like the stories are being made up later to explain things that existed earlier, right? Like I think it's all of the Olympians appear in Linear B writing. And so, in that case, like we're having ancient Mycenae. There is no Greek language. There's only Linear B. We don't have any stories. We only have records. And so all we have from the gods are their names in Linear B. And then, a few hundred years later, people have the Greek alphabet and they're coming up with stories. They have the Greek language. They're coming up with stories. And so they already have these names and they're ascribing stories to them. So it's just not really about like one chronologically having to connect with the other. It's just about multiple stories that existed in different time periods and different places, eventually being brought together and ending up incredibly confusing. I fucking love that question though, because I absolutely love thinking about it that way and explaining that part because it's my fucking favorite. Like, I used to be so annoyed when they don't line up, and now that I have this like deep, obsessive cultural knowledge of like what was actually happening back then, I'm just so obsessed with it because I think it's so interesting to think about like maybe why these stories became put together. Because I mean, I think, my rationale at the beginning is like, okay, Athena was incredibly important. It was really famous that she was born from Zeus's head. And so they had to have somebody get him out, or they wanted to at some point, it added to the story or whatever. And it's like, well, Hephaestus uses a hammer. But then it's like, separately, in a totally different area or a totally different time period or something, somebody's like, well, I want to know how Hephaestus came to be born. And they're like, well, Zeus isn't his dad. Like, Hera's his mom and we don't have a dad. So, okay. Well, why would Hera do that? Well, Zeus had Athena, without a woman. So maybe Hera was jealous. And so she created Hephaestus. And, there's no one going back and being like, well, that doesn't make sense because this happened, like it's just a completely separate idea, separate story, separate notion that then, 3,000 years later, we have to fucking figure out. And I am obsessed. So truly thank you for that question. And also you did make me want to go into a ton of detail about both of those births because I think they're so much more interesting than I've said in the past. That was great. Sky, thank you. Okay. This next one is from Jane, and they said a lot of nice things, but I'm going to jump to the question. Can you elaborate more about the island of Aegina and the story behind the Temple of Apphia? Do you know why, or can you speculate why it was incorporated into the cult of Athena? That's fun. Oh my god, the Temple of Apphia is wild. So the background, guys. The island of Aegina is in the Saronic Gulf. It's like half an hour ferry off of the coast of Athens, like tucked in the Saronic Gulf. You can Google it. It's lovely. There's a handful of islands there. Salamis is another. Anyway, on Aegina, there is this temple on the top of a hill to a name of Apphia. It has the name, so we know that temple was to that character, that figure, deity, like, because we don't totally know who she is, which is the fucking best. But we know that name, and it's the only temple to Apphia that we know of, and it's like one of the very few references even to the name of Apphia. And so, when I was there on the group tour, because that was our little island stop at the end, our tour guide, who is the most fucking wonderful woman in the whole world, she told us a story about a nymph who washes ashore, and then, eventually the temple gets dedicated to her. So I think that's one cultural story for, how it came to be. But I don't think that there's any kind of confirmation. Like, it could be about this nymph, this temple, but like, I don't think it was particularly common to have such big temples to nymphs, like, because that's just not the purpose they served, mythologically and culturally. Like, right, nymphs just represented often bodies of water, trees, the ocean. Like, unless I'm fucking crazy and I've missed everything over the years, like, there weren't really many temples. Shrines, maybe, but this is a big marble temple, and I think it's archaic, which means it's also very old in the grand scheme. And it's just fucking fascinating that it is this goddess that we basically know nothing about. We're not even 100% sure which character would be referring to. Like, it's just baffling. And that it's on this little island so close to Athens was interesting in itself. But then the tour guide was telling us also that Aegina and Athens were like rivals, major rivals for a really long time. I think both in the ancient world and later. And it was like a really long-standing thing. And so I wonder whether, any kind of connection to Athena is coming from, Athens' need for supremacy, because we know they had it in the ancient world. We know. And so it might have been their way of being like, well, yeah, our goddess is also part of Phaia temple, I don't know enough about the connection with Athena, but that would be my guess. So I would love to do more research. After going to visit that temple again and with this group, I wanted to do more on it. So I do hope to talk about it in more detail in some kind of other episode, because it's really interesting, but unfortunately it is mostly interesting because it is so mysterious. But we'll speculate more in the future for sure. All right, this next one is from Tim from England, who says, when the Greeks conquer Troy, Helen manages to charm Menelaus into taking her back unharmed as his queen, while the Trojans, who she has lived among for the past 10 years, are all being killed or enslaved around her. I'm not aware of any tradition that she asked the Greeks to spare a single person in Troy from death or slavery. Was this callous and ruthless of Helen, or would she have been in such a vulnerable position regarding being accepted back by the Greeks that she dare not risk being seen to have any sympathy for any Trojan, not even the families of Hector or Priam, who she said at Hector's funeral had treated her kindly? Tim from England. Love that question, because much like the question about chronology earlier, it allows me to rant about my favorite thing. And that is, so, when it comes to the story of the Trojan War, the only piece that survives in detail from the ancient Greek period, in terms of like a cultural mythological source, is the Iliad. So we have that and the Odyssey, I guess, for the Helen of it all. Obviously, it's not the war, but it does feature Helen. And so those are the only two, very ancient, distinctly mythological sources for the story. And I say that because we have no fucking idea what would have happened to Helen, or, how it happened through those two sources, right? There's nothing. We have in the Iliad, the war isn't even over. Helen's in the Trojan side. She's watching everything. She does say that they've treated her kindly. She does appear to be pretty sympathetic to the Trojans. She generally, seems to be accepted. We have all of this stuff about her, right? That's all we have of Helen in the Iliad. I mean, she says a lot of things. She's very interesting, but we don't know anything more about her fate, right? Because the Iliad ends after Hector's funeral, and we're just like, okay, that's what we have. And then the Odyssey, obviously, it's taking place 10 years later, 10 years after the end of the war. But again, we didn't see the end of the war in the Iliad. So we don't know what the end of the war looked like in the version of the Odyssey. And the Odyssey that survives tells us that Helen was with Menelaus. They seem pretty happily married, but also suddenly she's kind of a witch. She performs pharmakeia on Menelaus and Telemachus and makes them sleepy and like calm. And so we know that, Helen took her back, or Menelaus took her back, and that she seems pretty happy there. Again, she's kind of witchy. The Helen of the Odyssey is fucking awesome. And so, that is all we have from the oldest of mythological sources. The Iliad and the Odyssey, I'm sure Hesiod maybe mentions a little bit, but he definitely doesn't say anything about, like, the end of the war and how exactly she got spared, or how she ended up back with Menelaus. We don't have that until something like, there's obviously some plays about the Trojan War. So one being, I haven't read them all, I should say, but like, there are a number of plays, at least by Euripides and others as well. The Trojan Women, obviously, I've covered, but it was so long ago, I don't remember the details too well, but I'm pretty sure Helen is in it. So we have the Trojan Women, which I'll say, like, obviously it does say something. It's about the enslavement of the Trojan women. Helen is part of it. It definitely speculates on the treatment at the end and how her character gets handled. But you have to remember that that's a play. It's an adaptation. It's by nature playing with a story, and we don't know what Euripides was playing with. We don't know what sources he had for that part of the story because they don't survive for us today. It's believed that there was an epic cycle. It's believed that there was an ancient version of the story from maybe a similar time period, maybe shortly after Homer, Homeric Iliad and Odyssey, but we don't have anything. We don't have certainty. We don't have an actual source. What we get later, right, is the fall of Troy. I've been reading it on the show, and obviously that's about the fall of Troy. Surprise. But that is written during the Roman period. It's so late. It's a good, probably, I'm not going to Google the date. I'm going to just say a good 800 years after the Iliad and the Odyssey, right? So we can't be certain that story existed back when the Iliad and the Odyssey were coming around and were kind of influencing the cultural knowledge of Helen. We know that Helen was hated by a lot of the Greeks, They did like to blame her. There's a lot of references to that, and again, we do have the Trojan women. I wish I could remember what happens to Helen. But there's commentary there. But at the same time, Euripides also wrote the Helen, right? Euripides loved to write completely different, completely contradictory versions of his own characters. There's the Helen of the Trojan women, who was very much the Helen, who had been taken to Troy, who had been among the Trojans, who, she's with the women who are getting sent off enslaved, and she has some interaction with Menelaus that I've forgotten, that ends up, with her going back to Sparta. But in Euripides' Helen, she's like a ghost who got brought to Egypt, and the Helen the ghost was in Troy, and the real Helen got brought to Egypt, and Menelaus is some bumbling weirdo who gets shipwrecked and stumbles on shore wearing a fishnet and is like, "Are you my wife?" And she's like, "I don't. Are you my husband? You look kind of gross," And so we have those two differing versions of Helen by the same playwright. So it's a good example of we can't. We love the playwrights, obviously. Euripides is my entire soul in a person. But we can't actually use them for any kind of definitive knowledge on mythology. We can say that this is what survives, but we cannot. It's like saying that, the Lord of the Rings movies are absolutely the same as the books. That's not true. They were working with time and not wanting everyone to sing so many songs, not feeling like Tom Bombadil needed to wander us all through the general region before anything exciting happened. I don't want any Bombadil heads coming at me. I do love him. But it was an adaptation. It was working within the limits of the screen, of the technology at the time, of the screenwriting, of the length of the originating work. The plays are that. The plays are the Lord of the Rings movies. They're great. Perhaps some of the greatest art anyone has ever given us. But they are not the books. They lack a lot of details. They changed a lot of stuff. They had to work within what they had. That's the plays. And so all of that is the longest way of saying, I don't think that anything we know that survives for us today about Helen's transition from that period of her being on the side of the Trojans and seemingly happy and respecting them to her being back in Sparta with Menelaus. We have nothing within that transition. And so I don't think it's reasonable to say either way, I guess. I don't think that there is any kind of answer that I could give that would be based in the ancient sources, because those don't exist for that. In terms of the cultural knowledge, obviously we do have the versions that come later, but those are coming at a period where people are, also interacting with 1,000-year-old work, right? Imagine that, right? It's like saying that if somebody rewrote Shakespeare's, I don't know, like a bunch of those kings or whatever. Like if somebody rewrote all of those, that it would be the same as Shakespeare's. Like somebody today rewrote all of those, the idea that it would be the same. It wouldn't. It would have a lot of similarities. It would be based on that. It would be adapted from all of those different things, but like it would not be the same. So I don't like to speculate so much. I don't, I like the Helen of the Odyssey. So maybe if I am going to like speculate, and again, none of this has sourcing in the ancient world. That's what is so interesting. I fucking love it so much. I'm obsessed. But if I was to speculate, like my goal, Helen, for bridging that gap between the Iliad and the Odyssey would be for her to, witness the fall of Troy, the death of all these people around her who I believe that she recognized how they treated her and appreciated that and understood, and that I believe that she respected at least Hector and Andromache, and I should say Priam and Hecuba. I think that she did respect those people. I think she watched the fall of Troy. It would have been horrific and, life-shattering. She'd also watched the 10 years. That would have been life-shattering. And to imagine that it was contributed in large part by you, even if you had no control over it, that would be fucking traumatizing. So I think that she is an incredibly traumatized woman who has been through 10 years of hell. Regardless of whether she chose to go or not, she couldn't have foreseen that was going to happen. And so I think probably, if we're giving her a reality story that is based on the events that are happening, I think she's an incredibly traumatized woman who had to be pragmatic and recognize that if she wanted to live and go home to her daughter in Sparta, because you have to remember she has a daughter in Sparta, right? Hermione. And so, if she is a woman who has just been through something utterly horrific, utterly traumatized, wants to go back to her daughter, everything is burning around her, of course she's going to, find a way to make that happen. That was a crazy long answer, but I fucking loved that question. Because I just think it's the most interesting to consider that there is no answer to that. And that also the later stuff that we get, I wouldn't say necessarily Euripides, but a lot of references to Helen and stuff from later sources are working off of a long-standing tradition of blaming Helen, right? By the time all of those come along, it's pretty well accepted that Helen was part of the cause of the Trojan War, if not the whole cause. And so they're already working from this biased place of having their cultural identity hinge upon this woman going to Troy. And so they're not going to see her in a great light, and I think Euripides adds at least some complexity. I think he saw that there can be two sides, that maybe, there's more to it. But really, we're just working with this enormous disconnect over what people would have believed at the time when the Iliad and the Odyssey were being established and what people believed by the time we have record of somebody writing about that period in Helen's life, right? We're working with centuries of cultural change and cultural memory being adapted to the growth and the changes within the culture, and that is influencing how we then see this later Helen. The later Helen is just going to be inherently different from the Helen of the Iliad and the Odyssey. It's impossible for that not to happen. It's, again, I like to just use Shakespeare as the best example of the amount of time that we're working with in between most of these sources. My opinion on, say, I don't know, Macbeth, Lady Macbeth, my opinion on a Shakespearean play is very different from an Elizabethan person's opinion on a Shakespearean play. And that's what we're working with, All right, this next one is from Steph, who says, I remember you saying you listen to Taylor Swift while you write. What are your thoughts on her references to mythology in her last few albums? Obviously Cassandra, but also Labyrinth and the Phoenix reference in You're Losing Me. I'm just secretly hoping she's a mythology nerd too. My husband has been watching Blood of Zeus on Netflix and asked me for lots of questions. We're curious about the Aneroi and their role in mythology. Oh, and then Steph says a lot of very nice things. Thank you. That I'm not going to read because otherwise I'll get weird. So to your questions. Okay, so yes. I think it was confirmed under Tortured Poets department that she is a myth nerd. It did establish a hope deep in my soul that she has listened to my show. I would be fine to have confirmation of that. You can do it in secret. I won't tell Taylor. Anyway. Yeah, like I'm not as good. Like I listen to her a lot. I do. And I really enjoy her music and absolutely feel that way. And I do consider myself a fan, but I'm not like, I wouldn't consider myself the type of Swiftie who like knows all the things is what I'm saying here. So I'm not going to have great answers, but I can definitely speak to those two songs. I don't remember the Phoenix and You're Losing Me, but I mean, a Phoenix is also not particularly Greek mythology, but it definitely like, Phoenix is like a little bit, I would say if I'd only heard that reference, I wouldn't say that because Phoenix rising from the ashes is just like a thing now. You don't have to be a myth nerd, but I definitely like, within like, I don't even know, just immediately upon waking up the morning after Torture Poets, people were like, Liv, have you heard Cassandra? So I did go listen to Cassandra very quickly. But what interested me more was actually the prophecy. So you didn't mention it, but I'll speak to Torture Poets. I don't know enough about Labyrinth. I'm realizing that's I had it in my head for a sec that I was on Torture Poets, but it's not. So I don't remember the lyrics enough to speak on that. But I will speak about Cassandra and even more the prophecy. Because, I listened to Cassandra. That album was so overwhelming with the volume that I listened very piecemeal and all over the place. I listened to Cassandra after Florida because Florida was my rule. My friend and I got to listen to Florida together first because if I love anyone more than Taylor Swift, it's Florence and the Machine. So, like... Cassandra is what I'm saying. Cassandra's good. I like Cassandra. It's sad. It definitely has very in-depth mythological references. I don't think that necessarily either one has more. I think the putting of the prophecy directly before Cassandra was like, that's where I went, our girl's been paying attention. And I don't know, we're going deep into Swiftie lore a little bit now because for the lead up to Torture Poets, I did pay pretty close attention. And there was that whole like LA pop-up thing, right? Which is like it was an office. And people also pointed out to me that there was a statue of Diana. Now they're going around online from what I could see because I was obsessed with just creeping to see what people were saying about that. And yeah, that I just kind of that's how I ran it. And I got furious with the volume of people that would like use this one tweet as proof, and they would call that statue the Diana of Ephesus, and that like there was this whole story about it being brought to London and breaking and stuff, and like I couldn't find that anywhere. If anyone has it, send it over. I couldn't find that as being proof of anything, because also if you look up Diana of Ephesus, like one, Ephesus had a very, very big temple to Artemis. There were a shit ton of statues of Artemis in Ephesus. It was big. And also the most famous Artemis of Ephesus is the one where it looks like she's got a bazillion boobs. So it's not that one. That one's like the one that was in that little like pop-up thing was like a distinctly average, like if you Google statue of Artemis, it's usually that one. Like that's the one you can find in like random stores. Like I'm trying to think of where I was literally with a friend the other day and we were like wandering a store somewhere in the States and I saw that statue of Artemis and I was like, oh, there's Artemis. Like it's the one that's everywhere. So I don't think it was that in depth is what I'm trying to say here. This is going too long. But I do think that writing the prophecy and then having Cassandra line up with it was like so on point because I mean, obviously Cassandra is all about prophecies, but then to like begin it with this, call to change a prophecy and having it all be about, love, someone who wants my company, somebody to speak to. Like, I feel like she's really, leading up to the Cassandra, but in a really interesting way that, like, I do think, she did some reading at the very least. If she's not like a full myth nerd, like, I think that she definitely did some research that I appreciate and I think was done well. Because then what I like about Cassandra is that I think, like, she didn't lean into the prophecy of Cassandra because she'd leaned into it in the prophecy, and instead latched on to the ideas of, like, I mean, I think it's Cassandra as witch in the song, but, like, I think that it is, like, a pretty nice reading of Cassandra in, the most traditional source, the Agamemnon by Aeschylus, because, that's where there is screaming, there is, like, she says they filled my cell with snakes. Obviously, snakes are sacred to Apollo, very specifically. Cassandra mythologically was a priestess of Apollo. Like, there are lots of things happening in there, while the ancient Greeks did not have the same concepts of, like, a witch that we do, and burning a witch at the stake, obviously, like, and then they didn't have the same negative connotations to witches, but, like, it suits Cassandra very well, and I think does go deeper, and, like, and then she's got the line, like, they killed Cassandra first because she feared the worst, and, like, that's interesting. I mean, I don't know. There's a lot to break down. I was, like, really hesitant to do anything with this when it first came out, just because I was, like, going through it, and I was like, I don't want to engage. I do like to have things in my life that I don't, like, make a big thing publicly, just because, like, having the thing that you, like, love so much be, like, also your job is just kind of, like, weird, and I like to have things that are, like, just mine, and I keep them for me. So I don't talk too much about Taylor Swift, but I was happy to answer that question because I do think it's really interesting. And I agree with you that it was definitely Tortured Poets that made me go, oh, I see what you're doing here. Have you perhaps maybe listened to a podcast that you maybe liked and noticed that I've named at least one song title in reference? Maybe. Anyway, now that's in my headcanon. So thank you very much for that question. And I'm sorry for anyone who doesn't listen to Taylor Swift. All right. This next one is from Stephanie, and she has 2 questions. 1. How did patriarchal narratives reinterpret or diminish the power of primordial goddesses over time? 2. How did the transition from matriarchal to patriarchal societies affect the portrayal of primordial goddesses in mythology? And Stephanie, I love these questions, but also because I have answered them in the best way I can currently, and will do so much more over time, because that is my current pet obsession. I'm assuming you heard at least something, because otherwise you're just, like, tapping into my brain. That is my obsession right now. I keep seeing more and more evidence of it in my research and, like, in the world. So I will absolutely do more on it, but I'll say right now that, like, the answer to your questions is, like, 2 episodes in itself at least. So I will not give a detailed answer today, but mostly because I will send you to the episode I did on March 5th of this year called Parthenogenesis, Prehistoric Goddesses and the Threat of an Independent Woman. And that is where, at the time of that writing in March, I gave all of my current theories about that. I don't know if that's what you maybe did end up listening to, in which case I hope to bring more answers, but it's not something that is, like, easily researched, because I think it's still pretty fringe to say that with any kind of definitive, understanding. But I think it's pretty obvious in a lot of stuff. So, that was my episode going through what I think makes it pretty clearly something that did happen and that we can see, ripples of in the mythology and stuff. But honestly, like, the more I come across more, be they theories or actual sources, I guess, that I find, I don't know. But basically all to say, like, this is not the last that I will talk about that. as soon as I have more to share, you know, in any kind of cohesive way, I will, because when I tell you I think about it all the time, I'm not lying. So those were incredible questions. Listen to that episode if you didn't already. Again, it's from March 5th of 2024. And just know that as soon as the opportunity presents itself, I will be talking about this more because I will never let it go. All right. We've got 2 from McKenna. First one, why is Nike so connected to Athena? Good question. Fairly simple answer. Remember, Nike is a daimon god. I hate trying to say that word. Anyway, Daemon. She is a goddess that is the whole purpose of her character in the mythology is to serve as like a personification of victory, right? Those are personification gods. They're really just a human-like form of a concept. She is victory. And because Athena is goddess of Warcraft, and also I think it's fairly safe to say that Nike's association with Athena is most prominent in Athens. And I think that's where the notion mainly comes from. I could be wrong about that. She might be everywhere. I think it fits either way, but like, you know, basically when Nike is with Athena, that is like a victorious form of Athena. It's like saying like Athena victory, right? It's like this specific type of Athena. All of the gods have different forms of themselves. Usually they're in the form of epithets if we're reading it, where it'll be like Zeus Chthonios is one, and that means like, actually I guess that just means Hades, because it basically means like god of under, because Zeus ultimately is really also just like the word for god. I mean, that's like a oversimplification. It's more like Deus, because Zeus is like a modern kind of spelling. In any case, like there's a lot of gods and goddesses who have these different forms, you know. There's like the Pythian Apollo, right? That's Apollo as a prophesier. That's Apollo, you know, as an oracular form. And then there's also like, you know, versions of Apollo that are aligning with medicine and, you know, poetry, right? There is, I'm trying to think of all the different, basically it's everything. And so this is just that. Nike being with Athena is symbolizing a victorious form of Athena. Man, I can overcomplicate an answer, but I love it anyway. Thank you, McKenna. McKenna's next question was, why is Hera always made to be a villain in Women's and Hercules' story? And that's just misogyny, girl. That's just misogyny. No. Like there's a lot to say on Hera. I actually think listening to that Parthenogenesis episode from March 5th that I just mentioned, I think that one also touches upon some of that, because I mean, the thing about Hera, like, yes, she is, you know, she is always a bit of a baddie. She's always punishing women. She's very jealous in the stories, and I, you know, I mean, that's a fact you can say about the sources, but I think that is really just coming from various forms of men fearing women, fearing, you know, I shouldn't, you know, I'm not trying to gender. What I really mean is like people who don't grow life within themselves, fearing the people who can grow the life within themselves. That's what is kind of happening in a lot of these stories of goddesses, certainly goddesses of that level of power. Men are threatened, and again, I'm going to use the word men, but that's what I mean. Men are threatened by that ability, by the fact that a woman can become pregnant and they don't necessarily have confirmation of who's the dad. You know, they were very afraid of that, and they built up a lot of different stories to account for that fear, to understand it, to work within it, to rationalize it, all of these different things. And gods impregnating mortals is one of those ways. And so I think with Hera, you know, acting as this like vengeful, you know, jealous stereotype of a woman, it is really working within that, right? It is a cautionary tale It is a, well, men don't impregnate women who aren't your wife because it causes all of these issues when it comes to citizenship and who is and is not a Greek and, who is and is not from this father, because that's what they cared about, even though the babies came out of the ladies. And so, Hera serving in this way is kind of a warning to men, but it's also a warning to the women, right? It's a warning to women, don't get yourselves impregnated by men. That'll cause troubles for all of those different reasons. Because the familial line was patriarchal, obviously, right? They only cared who the dad was. Like, in order to be Athenian citizen, it only mattered if your dad was Athenian. I think I said that with confidence. It might have been slightly different, but, like, women weren't citizens fully. So women weren't technically fully Athenians. And so, like, they divined, like, their mortal importance on a patriarchal line, but biologically it's a matriarchal line. That's just how bodies work. And so that is, like, to my mind, the character of Hera, like, so much of that type of mythological stories is really just us watching the patriarchy fight with the matriarchy. Watching it slowly squish women down under their thumb so that the men can continue to seize control, and we can end up where we are today, where things are going great. That's why I think Hera acts the way she does. All right, next one, and either last or second to last for this run, I think, is from Gabe. Will you talk about the myth of Typhon and the idea from philosophers that sometimes conflict in myth doesn't actually mean conflict, but cooperation? Yes and no. I definitely have an episode on Typhon that goes into pretty good detail. So if you were to Google Myths Baby and then Typhon, you're gonna find it. You can listen. That's way more detail on Typhon. But and also, like, I don't really care to dig too deep into philosophical ideas because it's too much to read. I have enough already. However, based on the phrasing of this question, I will provide a comment. So, like, I mean, with the basic premise of conflict in myth doesn't actually mean conflict but cooperation. Like, I agree. I would see it, though, in a way where it's like, it's not the conflict being cooperation, it's the hidden cooperation behind the conflict. So, like, in the case of Typhon, I mean, there's lots of different versions, so it really depends what you're looking at. So maybe I won't talk about Typhon. I would talk about the Gigantomachy, because I think that's a really good example. The Gigantomachy is one of their it's a more famous, clash than Typhon. It's when all the gods got together and they fought the giants. The giants were on Gaia's side. It's another great example of how mythology shows the ripple effects of patriarchy squishing matriarchy, because the giants and the people on that side of the war are from Gaia. They are from Mother Earth, and the gods who are against them are working with Zeus. So it's literally the new patriarchy that is working on smashing the pre-existing matriarchy, and it's just like that put into a story. But to your, non-patriarchal related question, I would say that it's really just that, like, the gods are cooperating together. The Gaia and the giants are cooperating together. So, I think maybe it's just, I might not just understand the philosophical treatise or the question, which is also fine. But yeah, I mean, I think that there are, there's not cut and dry anything. I mean, even, I talk about it all the time, but, like, Euripides' quote unquote tragic plays are not always that tragic. Like, I mean, there's so many complexities to art. Yeah, so I mean, that's not a great answer, purely because I'm just not that interested in philosophy, or at least formal philosophy. I like thinking about stuff. All right. This one from Nick is great. First, I talk about having read Edith Hamilton's Mythology and there being a note in there. And the sort of memory of the note is this: an acknowledgement of the sheer number of stories involving Zeus's encounters with women across the ancient world, and posited that from an allegorical lens, this could be partly a way to explain how Hellenism spread and ingratiated into different cultures across the land over time. They say, assuming I didn't completely imagine that because I couldn't find it, what are your thoughts? And then there's some more, but I have thoughts, so thank you. Yeah, so I think that's probably partially it. It aligns also with the stories of Heracles, right? They're both really similar in that way. I think that the stories of Heracles actually fit that description a bit better, in my opinion, because it's really even more about, the stories being spread across the Greek world. Now, obviously, Zeus's are as well. I don't necessarily read it so much as, like, the spread of the religion, because, like, I mean, I guess if you're going into, like, Asia Minor, like, if you're going as far as, into modern Turkey and beyond, like, if the stories are focusing on those regions, yes, I think that's probably likely. But predominantly they are, speaking to regions on the Greek mainland, on the islands that are, like, very historically kind of tied to the same general cultures as far as we understand. And so I think what that is really is just more of the same with Heracles as well, where it's really just about, like, putting a place on the map. I think it's more about acknowledging a smaller area's connection with Zeus, where they would want to sort of just raise awareness. Like, if you're in this, like, little city-state, far off in the Peloponnese, and you're not dealing with the larger powers very much, you want to be on the map. Like, the Hellenic religion, the, like, culture was shared and not shared, right? Like, everyone was, like, different city-states, but they shared a lot, and they're, like, bickering siblings. And so, if, like, the middle child is getting forgotten, in the grand scheme of parenting, they're gonna, like, start drawing attention to themselves. And so, like, having a story where Zeus assaulted a woman in your town and she gave birth to a child and that child was some big hero, like, that's a way to do it. But I also think, in addition to that, what it is tying into is the thing I've just talked about for the last few answers. That it is about speaking to fears of paternity, and also about just implementing as much patriarchal control as possible. And I want to be clear that, like, I don't think that these things were being done intentionally. I don't think anyone sat down and they were like, we're going to make women feel bad. Like, I think it's just that is what is being reflected. Like, the cultural changes that happened are being reflected in the stories that were developed at the time. Because what Zeus's stories tends to do is, just really serve as these kind of continual examples of women not being able to resist men, be it sexually, be it politically, be it, physically. There's just a huge volume of that. And so I think it's this, like, almost a reminder, like, we're in control. The penises have the power. This episode is getting unhinged. I'm here for it. The penises have the power, and I think that's kind of what is appearing here. Now, having said all of that, there's also, like, I will draw attention to one specific story, and that's Io. That's the woman, that Zeus had this quote-unquote affair with, and then Hera got suspicious. He hid her by transforming her into a cow, and then Hera found out and had her punished with the gadfly, and Io wandered all over the Greek mainland, down over into modern Turkey, and then up into Egypt. Reasonable. And that story doesn't, I also don't think that really so much accounts for the spread of Hellenism, also because I feel like chronologically that just doesn't really work, because these stories are, like, before a lot of, anyway, with Io specifically, I think that what that story is really doing is trying to put Greece on the map. I think that that's true in a lot of cases too. It's not so much about the spread of Hellenism naturally, but it's about being like, hey, these new temples we've installed, like, this guy, slept with your sacred female character, so, like, you should probably worship him, kind of thing. There's a lot going there. It's not so much like an intentional spread of the like it is, but I mean they basically what I'm just trying to like make clear is that the Greeks were not doing Christian missionary work. You know, when they were spreading their religion, it was done, like, I don't want to lessen the impact. It was still imperial, but it wasn't like an attempt to crush out the existing religions. It tended to be like, let's find a way to incorporate them into our culture. And that's why you get gods, like even in the Iliad, right? We have like, you know, Aeneas is the child of Aphrodite, but he's Trojan, you know, he's not Greek, and Memnon is the son of Dawn, but he's, you know, Egyptian, he's not Greek, or he's Libyan, and so, you know, we're getting a lot of this. So what it's really just showing is, you know, a combination of things, and again, this is all my opinion and speculation, but like, I think it is this, you know, this reminder that the men are in control, and that they have the power to, you know, kind of subjugate a woman through an assault and an impregnation outside of marriage. It's also a reminder to, or a sort of, I don't know if it was kind of meant to be also like kind of a balm to men who did kind of have that happen. Like if their wives gave birth to a child and they're like, I don't know, I don't think it looks like me. Like maybe they're like, well, maybe it could be Zeus's. I don't know, you know? Maybe it also sometimes gave women an explanation, like if they were assaulted and obviously that would have affected them personally, you know, it's a horrible general mess, but like maybe they would be able to at least be like, well, no, it was Zeus, and like maybe they wouldn't get as bad treatment. I don't know. So I think it's working with a lot of different things here, but it's also just working with like the general spread of culture, but it's more like the sharing, right? The acknowledgement of the cultures around you and finding ways of connecting them with your deities. Like the Greeks were really impressed with the Egyptians. They were like, holy shit, these guys built this fucking pyramid thing and we've barely been able to squish mud together. And so they were like, well, you know, by the time the Greeks became, you know, as powerful and impressive as they were like, well, we recognize that Egypt did it first. But we really want to be the ones who seem the most impressive. So then they developed this story where Io goes wandering down from Greece and she goes to Egypt, and then she gives birth to all these kings and then eventually Egypt. And it's like, it's the Greeks' way of being like, nah, but like we were really Greek before Egyptians, like it's fine, you know? So it's this ways of kind of establishing so many different things, both, you know, dark when it comes to the assault portion, or also just like, no, these things just were like ways of connecting cultures. Again, very long answer, but I think it's a really interesting question because it really, like, there is so much going on, and there is so much that we'll never know for sure, and then there's so much that we can speculate on with all of these different pieces of evidence, and like, I love talking about this. So thank you very much. I definitely did not get through all of the questions that I wanted to, so there might be, I don't know, maybe another one of these coming, and we will definitely do it quarterly, so stay tuned. Thank you all so much for listening. Honestly, I mean, I fucking love this. I really, like, I want to thank you all for bearing with me over the last 8 months. Shit was dark, and I'm really, really feeling great about the show. Really optimistic about everything that's happening. We're making some really cool changes. I am, like, I'm really excited, just generally. And maybe it's partially the antidepressants, and maybe it's that I'm feeling better, hopefully the latter, or some nice combination of the two. But really, like, I just, you know, I appreciate all of you who've hung around through. Not, you know, it's funny because I think I have done some of my best work, and I also think I've done some of my worst work in this year. Yeah, at least it evens out. But really, thank you all so much. I hope to get more of your questions, and I'm glad that you want me to do this quarterly, because there's always so much, and it's really so much fun. And I really think I get this great opportunity also to share certain thoughts and ideas that I might have had on one episode, but like, I have so many fucking episodes, I don't expect you all to be able to listen to all of them. So if you have this question and that I've already answered it, at least I can, like, you know, send you 2 more, and then also, share a bit more, in context with your actual question. I get a lot out of it, and it seems like you guys do too. So we'll keep this moving. Now I'm just rambling. You can tell it's unscripted. Again, thank you all so much. Let's Talk About Myths, baby, is written and produced by me, Liv Albert. Michaela Smith is the Hermes to my Olympians. Oh, we've got so much great stuff in the works. Things are just, better than ever. Except maybe my brain. Select music in this episode was by Luke Chaos. The podcast is part of the iHeart Podcast Network. Listen on Spotify or Apple or wherever you get your podcasts. If you're listening on Spotify, leave me a nice comment. People have been really nice and they make me very happy. And I just got an app on my phone so I can check them maybe way too often. So thank you. I am Liv, and I really do love this shit, if you can't tell.